Okay, so the subject of our discussion this morning is my corrupt faith. And as I said to you during the week, this is probably one of the most important discussions we will have with you. And that perhaps we could ever have with you, which is interesting in itself. Faith is the most important thing you can develop from your side if you want to have a relationship with God. And most of us have a tendency to avoid the development of faith. And most of us don't even know why we do that or how we do that, but we do. Conversely, it's faith that leads you to doing all of the other things, like acting upon truth, receiving God's love, taking positive action to be loving in your life. Faith is what drives all that as well. So faith is a very important quality. So before we can discuss my corrupt faith, we really need to talk about faith itself. We need to define it and then look at it in terms of, a pure faith or a corrupted faith. So that's what we'll do first. So to understand what truly motivates me, I must understand faith and how faith interacts with morals and values. And remember yesterday we talked about our corrupt morals and values, and we said things about the corrupt morals and values, that faith will always overcome the corrupt morals and values if the faith is pure. Obviously, a corrupt faith will also overcome any good morals or values and eventually turn them into corruption. So faith is a very important thing to understand, and how it interacts with morals and values is something that we need to understand. So faith is a dominant controller of my life and my behaviour. And most people don't realise how dominant it is, how dominant faith is. And this is what we would like, why we wanted to have this discussion with you this morning. So what is faith? Well, this is a quote that comes from Afra in the, I think it's the Life Elysium or Gate of Heaven, or one of those anyway. The Gate of Heaven, yes. So faith is what may be called a telemicroscopic ability, the faculty the soul discovers in the depth of being, which, when pressed into service, so obviously it has to be relied upon, penetrates and illuminates the interior darkness, so whatever is inside of you that is dark, it exposes, and enables the soul to live in the future as if that future were already present. So you could say it illuminates what's within, all the attitudes that are within are illuminated. And also it allows you to live in a future that you desire as if that future was already present. So it has, obviously it has things to do with the future. If we contrast that with what the Bible says, this is a quote from the Bible in Hebrews 11:1, it says, I think that's it, yeah. Faith is the assured expectation of the things hoped for, the evident demonstration of realities, though not beheld. So it's basically saying, again, it's about the future, what you are hoping for your future. I would go one extent further and say it's what you believe will be in your future. Not will be possible, but what you believe will be in terms of is in your future, going to happen. And it's the evident demonstration of realities though not beheld. In other words, there's things that are real that you can't see. And faith allows you to see them as if they are real, that you could see them as if you could see them with your sight. So that enables you to sort of project into the future and have desires for the future, and then go, well, if I live my life a certain way, that's my future, that will be my future. It's a certainty, really, about your future life. And this is where it gets a bit tricky, because for most of us, we have what we believe are certainties for our future life, which are actually quite distorted and may never occur in our future, but are often developed because of how we've been hurt or how we've developed a facade in the past. And so what we end up doing is dragging the past into our future. And many of you have done that, right? Where you might be have a relationship, you end that relationship, you enter another relationship thinking it's going to be completely different, but lo and behold, it turns out to be very similar. Right? There's an example of dragging the past into the future. You believed that the future would be different, so obviously faith isn't just a belief, because you believed the future would be different, but it turned out to be exactly the same as the past. So that's not what we're talking about here, is it? It's not just a belief. So faith is what I emotionally feel or expect as a certainty to be true for me now and in my future, is another way of saying it. It's an emotional concept. It's emotionally what I truly feel is my future, not what I hope will be my future. So most of us hope for good things in our future and they never come about. Right? And that's because our faith is firmly set in a different direction than what we hoped. Right? So my feelings are, we often call faith what we would also call hope, and they are very, very different to each other. Faith is to do with the reality of our future, not what we hope our future to be. Now faith can be either pure or corrupt, but faith determines all my desires. It determines what I believe are the possibilities for my future, and drives what I hope for and it drives my actions as well. Most of us hope for things in the future because we're actually avoiding the emotions of the past and we're hoping that the future will be different. Right? Now that's not what we're discussing when we talk about faith driving what we hope for. What we're talking about when we talk about faith, we're talking about our emotional feelings about what is and what is real. And those things will drive my future. And they'll actually drive what I really hope for, not what I intellectually hope for. So it's, a lot of injuries we have are interesting in themselves because what happens is we often hope for things in our soul as an emotion that intellectually we think, well, that's really stupid to hope for. So, for example, many of us are what we would classify as self-attacking or self-defeating. We have feelings in us that mean anything we do in the future we believe is always going to fail. So that's a faith in our failure. Many of us have faith in our personal failure. We believe we are going to fail. And you can try to convince yourself out of that. You can try to convince yourself that you feel differently to that. But sure enough, in your future, you will, if something starts succeeding, you will ensure that it eventually fails. Just because of that underlying faith that you have. It's a very interesting concept, and it's something that we need to understand well. So faith is what motivates really all human desire and aspiration. If you think about it, faith really is our aspirations. And in a lot of ways, faith is really our desires. So it motivates or pushes the desires or creates the desires and aspirations we have. Every person has faith in something. If you didn't have faith in something, you would probably end up doing nothing. So just a simple example is, when you pick up the mobile phone and you turn on the on button, you have faith that it's actually going to go on when you press the on button. Yeah? Because the hundreds of times before that you've picked up the mobile phone and pressed the on button, it has gone on. So you now expect you pressing the on button as a reality for your future. You take an action because you believe it will go on. Now, If you didn't believe that, you wouldn't even bother pressing the button. Right? You just wouldn't. If you didn't have a belief that that would happen. So that's a faith in the operation of your mobile phone. You also have faith that when you dial a number, that you'll get connected. And that when you put that to your head and you put the earpiece to your ear, that you'll actually hear someone speaking. And that when you speak, they will hear you speak. You have faith that all of those things are going to occur. If you didn't, you wouldn't bother even using a mobile phone, would you? You wouldn't buy one if you didn't have some faith that that's the case. So every person has faith in something, even all the physical things that you have faith in. You do have faith in those things. And they motivate your action. So faith is what motivates behaviour. Even your thoughts, your ideas, your concepts, your words, your actions, your desires, your aspirations, your beliefs, they're all motivated by a level of faith. Right? And since no person is void of these effects, no person is without faith. So you all have faith. Sometimes faith has been such that you've done some things that perhaps nobody else would have thought of doing because you believed it was going to come out well, and it did. And that's an indication of faith that nobody else has had. But we all have faith in something. So faith is motivation, driving direction of change. So if we had to draw that on the board, we could say, couldn't we, that we've got our current condition which could be stated another way, which we could call that our will. Right? And we could state that another way, for many of us, that is a sum total of our memories, our emotions, our feelings and everything, but it also includes our morals and values that we talked about yesterday. So in other words, right now we have a condition, and that condition determines our morality and our value system, our internal value system. But then we have an aspired to future soul condition. And you could call that your faith. If this didn't exist, you could only do what your current condition ever dictated for you to do. But once this exists, this allows you to choose different things to what your current condition would allow you to choose. That makes sense, doesn't it? So you could say faith is what drives change. Now, if you have faith that if you do some what we classify as dark deeds, shall we call them, and you'll get some good results if you do that. And many people do this, don't they? They think, oh, let's go and steal from a bank, you know. The good result's going to be we'll have millions of dollars and we won't have had to work for it. Right? And you don't care about any of the other potential consequences. You will go and steal from the bank. You will. You'll steal other people's money because, and your justification will be, well, I could do it, so why not? It's going to make my life better, so why won't I do it? So you can have faith in a corrupt sense or in a pure sense. So faith is expressed as an intended or aspired to soul-based emotional state, driving or motivating future decisions. So what we're saying here is that now what we decide choose is going to be motivated by the faith that's within us. And that's irrespective of our current condition. So while your current condition does play a part in the decisions that you make, your faith can play an even greater role in the decisions you make. It can overcome your current condition and allow you to desire some future aspired to condition. So I believe and expect that what I have faith in to be true for me, even though I have no proof through my beliefs and my expectations and beliefs, even though I have no proof in them, I still believe that what I have faith in will come about. Now, of course, if I have done a thing in the past and it worked, then that sort of motivates me to believe it will continue to work in my future. So, for example, if I, during my younger years, stole and I always got away with it, then by the time I'm an adult, I will have faith that I can continue to steal and always get away with it. Not strictly true, of course, but that's what I will believe, and so I will continue to steal. But if I stole just once or twice when I was young and then got caught both times, then it's highly likely as an adult that I'll realise that if I steal, I'll probably get caught. So my faith will be motivated in a different direction. That if I steal, I'll get caught. Not if I steal, I'll get away with it. And that will drive my future decisions. In other words, I will probably not choose to steal. So it can be based on some past and then brought into the future, which is what it is for most of us. Our past is what we believe our future will be. For that reason, most of us have very little confidence in God's truth, because we believe our truth is how things are in the world. So often my beliefs and expectations are not true for many reasons. Let's look at some. Firstly, I've never experimented with God's truth to know what is true. I've only ever done what my parents or family or society has said is true. And so I've never really experimented with God's truth. So I don't really know what's true from God's perspective. I only know it from my own perspective. My retained unreleased emotional experiences create assumptions of truth. So in other words, I'm carrying around all of these injuries, these hurts inside of me, and those hurts presume the truth to be forever something, usually something negative. Right? And my childhood and education create assumptions of truth or limit my perception of God's truth. I see things, I have faith in things that my parents and society have faith in. And anything that parents and society do not have faith in, I also have no faith in. This is where it's very difficult for us to change from having faith in things we cannot see, that everybody believes are not possible, into having faith in those things that, although we cannot see them, we know are reality. It's very difficult to make that transition because the majority of us have already got quite set a corrupt faith, a faith that is based upon the error of society, multi-generational sin, parental faith has been transmitted down to the child. And then, of course, as adults, we've acted upon that and reinforced that to a large degree, because we act in sin, we get hurt by acting in sin, and then we feel that no matter what we do, we're always going to get hurt. Right? Because we don't see there's actually another alternative, and that is to not sin. So we're continuing to act in the same manner that our family and society has acted in the past. So our faith, you could say, is firmly set in the wrong direction if we're going to have a relationship with God. So often my beliefs and expectations are not true for some more reasons. My fear of previous pain and suffering or possible future pain and suffering prevents me from changing my assumptions. If you think about a lot of your desire to be inactive, not do too much, a lot of it is driven by the fear of making mistakes, isn't it? And that mistake might end up with you then getting a terrible result that would be detrimental to your life. So, some examples, just so that you can sort of connect to the idea or the concept. I claim to believe in an afterlife, but when my child dies, I am stricken with grief I cannot overcome. So what's that telling me about my faith? It indicates that I have no true faith in there being an afterlife as I claimed, but rather I believe that when a person dies, it's the end of the relationship, it's the end of life. I can no longer spend time with them anymore, experience their company anymore. That's what it indicates. A different kind of faith than what I claim to have. So frequently we claim to believe in things, but they are just concepts that try to make us happy. They're not real. They're not things we actually feel are real. Because when we put ourselves in the actual situation where it becomes real, like someone dies, for example, we think completely differently. So obviously the original claim was just something to keep us happy until the bad event occurred. And no more than that. Let's have a look at another example. I claim to believe in love, but I desire to feed my own addictions or others' addictions. So I claim to believe in love. What does that indicate? Well, there's no true faith in love as God defines love. Love without addiction, love without codependence. And most of us, if we're honest with ourselves, would see that we don't really have any faith that if we love without needing or wanting something in return, without feeding a person's addictions, that they're probably not going to love us, is what we believe. And so our true belief is that we would like to call addiction love, and that's what we still believe to be love. That's our faith. So our faith is set opposite to what we claim. It's frequently the case, isn't it? Another example. I claim to believe in God's way and divine truth, but do nothing to live in harmony with God's laws. So do I really believe in divine truth or God's way? No, I don't. I have no true faith in God, God's laws, God's way, or God's truth. Rather, I have faith in what my upbringing tells us, my concepts, the society's definition of what is true, a way a good life should be lived. And through such things, I define what pain and suffering I'm going to get and I think that actually I'll get less pain and suffering if I live the way society lives. And then, of course, when you confront society in some way and they attack you, you think that's borne out by that experience. That as long as I live the way society lives, I'll be happy. Right? Because if I don't, they might attack me and then I'll be unhappy, is the way we see it. Our faith is firmly set that living God's way is not really a practical thing on earth today. Another example, I claim to understand sin, but I constantly sin. So, in the case I have no idea or faith in the benefits of not sinning, understanding the effects of sin or the causes of sin or God's concept of sin. Rather, I have faith that sin will give me what I want when I want it. So, as we've said here, for change to occur, these situations that we're bringing up are demonstrating that a lack of faith exists, or a faith in what is corrupt exists. And for change to occur, to have a faith in what is true, I'm going to have to make, my faith is going to have to change somehow. Because if my faith doesn't change, I am always going to feel the same way as I feel, no matter how much I try to convince myself intellectually otherwise. I will always feel the way my faith dictates in the end. So these examples demonstrate that, faith has this sort of power, doesn't it? That most of the time we see the power operating in a negative direction. In other words, we have a corrupt faith that motivates our sin, but a pure faith is not something that we really grasp, because for most of us, it's just a belief we have, but it's not a faith yet. And when I say it's a belief, it's just not even an emotional belief. It's an intellectual thought to try to help us avoid some pain and suffering generally. Right? That's what we call, or what most people on earth call faith. And this is why you see, there are about 3 billion people on this planet at the moment that are either of the Christian faith or the Muslim or Islamic faith. And yet, when their children die, it's very, very rare for you to see the parent of that child feeling really confident that the child's now in a nice, at least in some land in the spirit world, being looked after, and they get to see them every night. And how many of those parents that you see mourning their children actually feel that? I've never really even seen it, ever. They say, most of those people say that having your child die is the hardest thing in life to experience. But I don't see why, if you had faith, that these other possibilities were real. Right? So the problem with most of our belief systems is we just see them as possible. But we don't really believe they're real. They're just possible. And the way many of us treat God's truth is the same way. Oh, well, it all sounds real good. I would love to believe it. But the reality in our heart is we don't believe it because we don't even think it's possible. And because we don't believe it, our faith, our corrupted faith, drives most of our actions, and therefore most of our choices and decisions, and most of our desires. And so most of our desires get developed over time to be sinful, because we don't have a faith that's based upon anything that's real or true, because we believe it's impossible to have a faith based on those things. So often the word faith is assumed to be pure. When we say, have you got faith in this or faith in that, most people think the word faith itself is a pure thing. But the reality is that it can be corrupted just as easy as any other thing that you do can be corrupted. So faith is motivation for the things I desire, whether those things are pure or evil. And we can see that faith in evil or error or sin, believing that the outcomes of sin are good or desirable, is the common state. Most of us have that state. That's why we sin. We wouldn't sin if we didn't have that state. Right? So you can see in a discussion about sin, we've got to really start considering the effect that faith is having on our sin, and how a corrupt faith motivates sin. But any feeling such as faith or any good thing that God has ever created can be corrupted. So if we look at just some examples of that, love can be corrupted and it becomes addiction. Truth can be corrupted and it becomes a facade. In other words, you say you believe the truth, but you don't act in truth and you don't tell the truth, but you put it on facade that you are in truth. That's a corruption of truth. Care for self corrupted becomes fear. In other words, you become frightened to do anything in the guise of caring for myself. Curiosity corrupted becomes cynicism and doubt. You think about a childlike curiosity. It's really like innocent, isn't it? The child just asks question after question after question. It's assessing every answer without actually preventing any answer. It's assessing them as it goes to see whether they're real or not real, but it doesn't doubt what it's being told automatically. It's not cynical about what it's being told automatically without putting or pressing the information into action and just trialling it out. The child is more open than that. That's curiosity. But when we become adults, we start being quite cynicism. We hear a new thing and, no, it's just, we're cynical about things. Or we prefer to have doubt because doubt allows us to get away with no action. These are ways things can be corrupted. So when we look at faith, obviously, faith can be corrupted. Now, you've seen this drawing, this diagram is in your outline, yes? And you can see that we put corrupt faith first in our list of corruptions, our motivations to sin, because corrupt faith dominates corrupt morality and corrupt values in terms of motivating us. Of course, you could also say faith, the pure faith, can dominate corrupt morals and corrupt values. Because faith always will dominate, whether the faith is pure or it is corrupt. It will dominate what you choose to do and accept as belief systems and values that you place on your life. So when we look at the power of faith over morals, we need to just sort of have a look about that in the future. But for now, we need to understand that corrupt faith comes about through a process. When I am conceived, rather than when I'm born, so there's a bit of a typo there in your outline. When I am conceived, I have no faith. In other words, I have no corruption of my faith, but I also have not developed any pure faith. I am a blank slate, ready for development. Right? And I don't really at that point, at my conception, have any motivation or desire that is bad or good. So that means that faith can be developed in a corrupt manner or it can be developed in a pure manner. I can choose to do it. But unfortunately, right at that time, I'm starting to also absorb emotions from our parents, the people who are around me, society. As I absorb those emotions, most of the emotions of other people are or have a portion of corrupt faith within them. And so I start absorbing some of those things. By the time I'm born, I have a little bit of those things in me, but I still have no capacity to act upon them. But after I was born, usually my parents, because they can now see me and they have to care for me, they start inculcating in me their corrupt faith. They want me to believe what they believe to be true. They view it as a protection for me. They see it as protecting their child against the world. And so the corruption of the parent now is an active desire from the corruption of the parent to inculcate or train the child to have the same corruption. Because the parent doesn't believe it's corrupted. They believe what they believe to be real, true. So faith itself can be developed in harmony with God's principles and become pure, or it can be developed in disharmony with God's principles and become corrupt. We can make a choice either direction. Which is great to know, really, because it means that even if you see your whole faith right now as being completely corrupt, you can make some different choices to develop a pure faith, and you can release a corrupt faith But releasing a corrupt faith requires experiencing the corruption emotionally. And this is where most people come to grief. They never release the corruption emotionally. They try to overcome the corruption through their intellect. And they never get rid of the corruption inside of them because the intellect is incapable of understanding the emotion. And certainly incapable of releasing it. Even when you understand an emotion intellectually, if you could properly understand it, you still can't release the emotion using your intellect. It's an emotional experience that you have to go through. So that's where most people come to grief. They believe they can develop a pure faith while at the same time avoiding their emotions. And it's impossible. So faith, when it's pure, is the most powerful force for positive change. Conversely, faith, when it's impure, is the most powerful force for corruption and negative change, right? Pain and suffering. So what we need to do is just have this comparison now of what's happening here in terms of why it is that faith has power over our corrupt morals and values. To do that, we probably need to discuss the interplay, don't we, between faith, like how it all works, and the morals and values that we have, and how that all determines our motivations for behaviour. But before we can proceed with that, we must remember that point that I've raised just earlier, and that is that morals and values, while they can drive our future choices and decisions, they are really a reflection of my current, as I've pointed out here, my current soul condition. So morals and values are how I feel about the things that are important right now, so that's my values, and morals are what I believe to be morally true right now. And they can move into a future place, but only by being drawn there through faith, proposing something for my future. So will is the genuine, we said this definition in our third assistance group, remember? Will is the genuine personal expression of the gift of free will, is determined by the current soul-based emotional condition, and is developed by desire. What are we saying desire really is? That's our faith, our aspiration. So will, our current condition, is developed, changed by having desires, or by having faith, you could say, by having aspirations. That's how we change it. If we have no aspirations and no faith, there will be no change of it. And that's how many of us live out our lives on earth. And it's only when we experience a lot of pain and suffering in the spirit world as the result of our actions that we usually start to realise that we need to make some changes. So it's measured, the will is measured by its relative harmony to God's principles still. So you could say your will can be sinful if it was in disharmony with God's principles, or there was no desire to be, there was no will to be living in harmony with God's principles, then you could say it's sinful will. And then if it is in harmony with God's principles, you could say it's a sinless will. The will motivated only by love or truth and other principles. And that then drives my thoughts, attitudes, beliefs. So that's my current state. So when we compare that with, just skip there. When we compare that with faith, we can see it's the faith that will be engaged to either determine my progress or my regression. faith is what causes me to go deep down into the hells or get to the heaven, the celestial heavens of the spirit world. Faith is the thing that causes me to act in both or in either direction. So it's a very, very powerful thing, faith. So while morals and values play a part in my motivations, because they are where I feel, that's what I feel or what I care about and what I believe is true, faith is really the largest determining factor in what I do. So you could almost say, couldn't you, that our entire week this week, we spent the first few days up trying to understand sin. We spent the next 2 days trying to see the effects and understand the effects of sin. And now, yesterday, we spent trying to see our motivations to sin, the causes of sin. And really, in a lot of ways, the causes of sin boils down to this one problem. My corrupt faith. So the beauty of things boiling down to one problem is that problems become simple to solve. So many of you, I've noticed in many of the, you've given us hundreds of questions now, and many of you in your questions, you've asked these quite detailed questions about all sorts of things. But almost in every case, you want an answer to your question without understanding the corrupt faith that even motivates the question. Which is interesting. See, a lot of our questions even are motivated by corrupt faith. A belief that it's not possible for something good to occur. So when we hear something good can occur, we go, oh, I don't believe that. I've got to ask a question about that. Not understanding that it's even just our corrupt faith that's prompting us to ask a question about that. Okay, so faith drives my future desires and decisions, and therefore my change. What I'm going to do in the future. Now, this is why for many people who have heard God's truth, you like what you hear, but liking it is different to having faith in it. Right? Very, very different. You see, unless the corrupt faith goes or disappears, you'll still like what you hear, but you'll never do it. Because your corrupt faith will motivate what you choose to do. Right? So it's one thing to like what you hear and to be walk away inspired, but in your day-to-day life, your aspiration is probably going to be still set on your corruption, on your corrupted faith. Unless the corrupted faith gets changed somehow, there is no hope for you even to get beyond just thinking it's all a great idea. So for most of us, we go for a while, usually 4, 5, 6, 7 years, listening to divine truth and thinking, yeah, it's a great idea, it just fascinates me, I just love listening to it, it's wonderful. Some people, they email us and they say, I've watched every one of your videos, and I go, wow, that's a pretty big feat. One guy said he watched them at 4 times speed. I said, well, that's impossible. Impossible to actually grasp anything. But most people, they say, yeah, I've watched them over many years, and yet I've noticed very little change in those people. And they don't realise that while they might love God's truth, the reason why there's no change is because the corruption in their faith still guides every choice they make in their day-to-day life. And their day-to-day life is motivated by the corruption of faith. So, faith is going to dominate my morals and values, and faith will determine my future direction. What I want for my future will always be more important to me than what has happened to me in the past. You have to think about that. What do we normally want to do with what's happened in the past? Forget it, isn't it? It's done and dusted now. I can't change it. It's happened. Some of it wasn't nice, and even the stuff that was nice, when you try to repeat it, you can't. So we're always seeking for that future thing. aren't we? It's a natural thing. God, in fact, created life to be that way, where you're seeking for the future thing. It's always going to be more important to you than what happened in the past. So although the pain and suffering of the past can be emotionally released, the past itself is fixed and unchangeable. But the future is full of all these wonderful, infinite possibilities. Of course, if my faith is corrupted, it's probably full of possibilities that are not so good. And if my faith is pure, it's full of possibilities that could be quite good. But there's still infinite possibilities in my future. So since I am naturally more attuned to the future than what is past and unchangeable, it makes sense, doesn't it, that faith will dominate my current condition. Faith is my desires for the future, and my current condition is the result of my unchangeable past. So what I do in the future is going to be motivated by my desires for the future. And that's whether I have a desire to heal the past or not. Can you see that? Yeah. Because the past was unchangeable. There's nothing I can do to change the past. I heal my past so I can change my future. So even that's motivated by wanting a different future. Yeah. So morals and values are a part of my current condition. Since they are, faith has power over my morals and values because faith has power to change my morals and values in any direction, whether it's towards corruption or towards truth and love, purity. So another thing we need to understand is that true faith is stronger than a corrupt faith. So while faith is stronger than any moral or value in any direction, so faith is stronger than a good moral. A corrupt faith is stronger than a good moral. A corrupt faith is stronger than a good value. Right? While that is true, true faith is stronger than a corrupt faith. So true faith sort of trumps the lot. And there's a good reason for that. Because true faith is based upon what is true and real in the eventual planning out of the universe, what is eventually going to be real for you. Whereas a corrupt faith is only temporary in the way that it's only based upon what you currently believe is true, which will change in your future. So a corrupt faith is always going to be overcome by a true faith at some point in the future. It's inevitable. You know, for most of us, we don't even have a real faith in an afterlife. Our actions on earth bear that out, generally. But as soon as you pass, are you going to have a faith in an afterlife? Probably, right? Because you'll still realise, once you realise you died, and you no longer got a physical body, you'll realise you're still alive. And in that moment, although you might never have had a faith in an afterlife on earth that was pure or true, it was just an intellectual concept that you were always afraid of not being true. The moment you pass and the moment you realise you died, and the moment you realise you're still alive, you'll realise, oh, this is true. Reality almost makes it so that faith does no longer need to exist. You see? Can you see that? And the reason why faith is difficult on earth is because we just addicted to the reality, the social reality that we have now. And that's why we believe it to be true. And there are some things that are going to change in your life as soon as you pass. Not a lot, You know, you still have the same old faith in other directions, but when it comes to faith about whether there's an afterlife or not, well, that will have been changed into reality. So you can see that the future, whether you like it or not, some of your corrupt faith is going to change. Because your experience in life will change. And so therefore your corrupt life, your corrupt faith will change. And for many that happens after they pass. And what we're suggesting is it could happen before then. So corrupt faith is based upon error-based, flawed human reasoning and expectations. Whereas true faith is based upon God's truth, what is true from God's perspective. So corrupt faith on a subject will preclude, this is another point that we need to bear in mind, it will preclude true faith on the same subject. The reason why that is because faith is emotion. And if an emotion exists in the soul on a subject, and it's very set on that subject, you're not going to absorb a new emotion about that same subject until that old emotion is released. You're just not going to. So for most of us, we're trying to change our faith without letting go of the emotions that drive our corrupt faith. Can you see it? That's why it doesn't work. The emotions that drive our corrupt faith will dominate our actions. They'll dominate our decisions. They'll dominate our life until they're released emotionally. That means that to release them emotionally, I have to feel them emotionally. It's, as Mary said earlier in the week, it sort of feels counterintuitive. I've got to let myself feel what I really believe in order to release what I really believe. We can do that without acting upon it, but we need to do it for a change to occur. Every time I've done that, I've changed very rapidly. Any time I've tried to overcome a belief with my intellect, I've never changed. So that means feeling the way the corrupted faith feels. And that's what's difficult. That's what most people find very difficult. They want to tell themselves, it can't be like that. It's better if it's not like that. This is causing me so much pain to even have to feel that it's like that. But that's what you've got to do. You've got to go through that in order to make the change. Make sense? And that's why most of us make very little change. So my soul is precluded from having opposing faith about the same subject. Now, that's a good thing to know, because what that means is I have to feel how bad I feel about something before I'm going to ever feel good about it. But for most of us, what we do is we try to feel good about it before we feel bad about it. Or even more than that, so we don't have to feel bad about it. And this is why we get exhausted, because we're trying to feel good about things all the time that we really inside feel bad about. And we're trying to overcome the bad feelings with some good thoughts. You know? There's some books that have come out recently that are very, very popular books. They're called positive thinking, or positive, it's called the positivity movement. Is it going to work? Not without releasing that corrupt faith. It's not going to work. Right? It's a great idea for people who want to avoid their emotions, but in the end, those emotions you're avoiding will always catch up with you. Right? So the corrupt faith must be emotionally removed in order to have it to allow the true faith to enter. So when we're going to be answering your questions about corrupt faith in an hour or so's time, you can see what we're going to be focusing our attention on, can't you? We're going to have to focus our attention on the idea or concept of emotionally removing a corrupt faith. emotionally removing what we believe to be true right now. And to emotionally remove it, you've got to let yourself believe it's true. Instead of trying to convince yourself that it's false. So, for example, if I believe that it's my right to have all of you love me, I've got to feel underneath all of that like strong desire for all of you to love me no matter what I do. I've got to feel about the corruption in that. And the way I do that is by feeling that nobody loves me no matter what I do. And then when I get through that, I'll have released that negative emotion, that corrupt faith, and then some of you might love me. But I won't expect it. I won't demand it. I won't earn it. I won't feel it as a duty to earn or any of those things anymore. Because I've released the corruption that tells me that that's true. So there's many examples we're going to give you right through your Q&As about how we can resolve this problem. So let's look at just a brief illustration, shall we, about the mud, about getting stuck in the mud. Because I like this illustration because it's an illustration we've used for many centuries, to be honest. And it's a great illustration because it sort of shows you why you do certain things and why you stay in certain situations for periods of time, and then how you can get out of them. Right? So this is irrespective of my morals and values and irrespective of whether I get outside help or not. My corrupt faith causes me to jump in the mud. We understand that step, right? My corrupt faith is telling me the mud's a good thing. Roll around in it. That's what my corrupt faith is telling me. And if I'm not in the mud already, I'm not having fun. Life's not good yet. I've got to get in this mud for it to be good. I've got to roll around in it, soak myself in it. Then my life will be better. That's what my corrupt faith is telling me. And my corrupt faith, when I'm in the mud, says, wow, this is fantastic. You're throwing the mud all over yourself and you're just really enjoying your life in the mud. That's what you think, right? But it's true, isn't it? That's how a lot of us live our life when we're really getting, like addictions met, for example. We just think, oh, it's just so wonderful. Just shower with me with more mud. I'm happy for that. Not understanding, of course, that getting my addictions met is actually causing pain and suffering in my future. Or pain and suffering for the people who are meeting my addictions. I don't look at any of that. I'm just enjoying the mud. So my corrupt faith helps me enjoy the mud. But my pain and suffering starts increasing. And it starts increasing to the point that eventually I don't like this mud anymore. The mud's dirty and it feels bad and, you know, I always feel like I'm covered in mud, which I am. I'm soaking in the mud, which I am. And I always feel like that, and so I start feeling the pain and suffering of the prior decisions to be there. Now the pain and suffering is like this feedback mechanism, isn't it? Saying, there's something wrong with my faith, right? My lack of pure faith, though, causes me to stay stuck in the mud. So even when I know that I'm in the mud, and even when I know that I don't really like being in the mud, and that it's causing me pain and suffering to be in the mud, it's my lack of true faith, pure faith, that causes me to stay stuck there. Isn't that the position most of us are in at the moment? Where we're not happy with it anymore. We know it's not right. It's, you know, I'm sick of this. My life's getting more painful, and I'm having all these negative things starting to happen now, and you notice that a lot as you get older, don't you, where you see more painful things happening. You know, I'm living, for many of us, we're living in a lone life, we're not even with a partner anymore. You know, we've had so many bad things happen in the past that we've sort of closed all that down rather than dealing with it emotionally. And we have some highly developed faith that that's the best thing to do to protect ourselves. And so what we're doing now is we're staying stuck in the mud. We don't like it, but we think there's no alternative to staying stuck in the mud anymore. because we don't have a pure faith in something that's true, something that's good. So we stay stuck in the mud a bit longer than necessary, hey? Really? That's what we do. And then what happens? I start to develop a pure faith. I realise it's my faith in something that's good that is the problem. And so what I need to do is start developing a faith in something that is good. Now to do that, I'm going to have to release my faith in what is bad or what is corrupt. And I'm going to have to allow truth to bring me faith in what is good or pure or true. Truth does that for me. Now, how do I go about releasing the corruption? Well, that's going to require, remember we talked about that yesterday, it's going to require that quality of humility. Because that's what allows me to feel emotions about things, right? So I'm humble now and I just feel my emotion that this is my life now. It's all hopeless and I feel all these terrible feelings. And the beauty of feeling those terrible feelings is I release them. And now that I've released them, I've got the capacity to develop a pure faith now. A faith based upon the truth I've actually heard, but not yet experimented with. Right? And then my pure faith, I then take some action on it, right? And that causes me to free myself from the mud. But the reality is I'm now out of the mud, but I'm still covered in mud. So I've stopped enjoying the mud, I've stopped soaking in the mud, I've stopped doing those things, but I'm still really covered in mud. So my pure faith is going to help me do one last thing. Get out the high pressure hose and blast it all off. Right? And get it all away from me. Pure faith in action results in freeing from the mud and in washing myself clean. So you could say that's the story of faith. And it's very interesting because I've seen in God's universe that story of faith is inevitable. That's interesting. Given enough time, you will do that. Given enough time. It just depends how much time you want to give yourself to do it, right? Now, I've seen some people do it over 10,000 years. That's how long it's taken them to do it. I've seen others do it in 5 years. Right? It just depends on how much time you want to take to do it. How much time you want to take and how much unhappiness you want to experience. How long you want to be dirty. How long you want to be in the mud. That's all it really depends on. And I say it's inevitable because given enough time, all of us at some point experience enough pain and suffering to change our faith. To start having faith in what is good. So you might decide, I've had enough of this divine truth now, I'm going to live out the rest of my life on earth, you know, the way I planned to do in the first place, it's all rubbish. My faith is telling me it's all rubbish. My day-to-day life tells me it's all rubbish. I'm just going to throw the whole thing away and just go back to my normal life. You know, I was happier in my normal life than I am now because I'm in this misery of realising I'm in the mud without doing anything about it. It's far better being in the mud and enjoying it than it is being in the mud and not enjoying it, is the way we think. Right? So we say, I'm going to just live out the rest of my life here on earth like that. Then we'll pass. Then we'll have the consequences of our pain, of our choices, our pain and suffering. And the pain and suffering that we experience might go on for another 100 years or a few hundred years, might even be 1,000 years, who knows. But eventually the pain and suffering, you will get tired of it. You will. And the moment you start getting tired of it, that's the moment you start looking at releasing your faith that's corrupt and developing a faith that's pure in something that's better. And when you do that, you'll start changing. And I've watched people, whether they had God in their life or not, it was immaterial, they've gone through that process. So it just depends on how long you want to take to do that process. That's the beauty of God, the way God's created your soul and your spirit life. You will eventually go through the process. So it doesn't upset me when people listen to divine truth and then they go away and ignore it as if they'd never heard it. It doesn't upset me. And the reason why it doesn't upset me is because I know they're making a choice, which is their right. They've been given free will by God. They're allowed to make choices. And I also know that eventually they'll come around. Everybody does. Everybody does. And you can be like a dead set atheist, like and anti-religion, and you can be anti-everything possible. You come around eventually. Right? And that's the beauty of the way God's created it. It's just really up to you as to how long that takes. How unhappy you have to be before you come around. That's all up to you. That's your choice. And we need to have confidence in that. A perfect God creates a perfect system where eventually everybody gets it. Sooner or later. It's just how soon can you get it? How soon do you want to get it? That's really all it depends on. So hopefully the illustration of the mud, being thrown helps you understand the cycle that everyone goes through. And like I said, this cycle is inevitable. It's an inevitable cycle. Most people, even the people who've first begun life on this earth in a pure state, without sin, decided that they're going to jump in the mud. And trust me, if you had been them, you probably would have done the same thing. Eventually decided to jump in the mud. Everybody tries the mud sometime. That's the way we are. We want to test the extremities of our limits. But unfortunately, we want to test the extremity of our limits in both the negative and positive direction generally. Right? But that's how we all are. Eventually we do. Test the limits. Now, for some people who are a bit more sensitive, their limits are not so, extreme because they feel the pain and suffering of their choices before others. For lots of different reasons, but a lot of it is just all about willingness to feel emotion. Right? And for others, they test the limits and test the limits and test the limits till they're screaming in agony, and then they stop. That's still the choice, And God sees his system when he's looking at all that. He sees his system as running perfectly, just as he designed it to be. Perfectly designed around your will and desire, your current soul condition and your future aspired to condition. So that's faith. We can see from that discussion, can't you, that faith obviously governs everything, really. So rather than covering the next two sections, which are about faith dominating morals and values and so forth, and the governance of faith over the way I sin, you can read those things for yourself in your outline, right? You can see them quite clearly how they play out. It's all quite understandable, isn't it, in terms of how that plays out. So what I would like to do is just make a few basic comments and then we'll conclude this discussion. There's two basic comments I'd like to make. The first one is, in your appendices of this particular outline, we've put examples of corrupt faith causing sin and given you an idea of the hierarchy or the governance of faith over morals and values. Right? So I'd like you to refer to those. The second thing I'd like you to refer to is we've also given you, in yesterday's presentation in the afternoon, a long list of sins that are evidence of corrupt morals and values. You could list those same things and say those same sins are also evidence of corrupt faith, couldn't you? And so what I would suggest to you is to look at that list again and go, now, it might tell me what my corrupt moral is and my corrupt value is, so let's have a look at that. if I've got one of those things in the list, I look at it and I go, right, what's my corruption in morals? What's my corruption of my value? But more importantly, and most importantly, what's my corruption in my faith that causes that thing to continue? What do I feel is true that causes me to believe that I can do that and it's going to be fine? I can carry out that sin and everything will be fine. So re-look at that list of sins that are evidence of corrupt morals and values and examine them in the light of sins being evidence of a corrupt faith. And make some comparisons for yourself. Now, we're at Assistance Group 4, aren't we? We're halfway through now. You're right on the last day of being halfway through our 8-group program. Right? Halfway through. By now, your own self-responsibility that you learnt all about in Assistance Group 3, when we talked about God's loving laws and principles, right? By now, self-responsibility should be kicking in, right? You shouldn't need to keep asking questions of other people because you've got God through the operation of your conscience. You've got all this information now. You also know about self-responsibility. So now it gets down to some decision-making processes that we've got to follow, isn't it? Are we going to look at our corrupt faith or our lack of a pure faith? Because that is what is now going to motivate our change. We're not really going to get most of what comes after this in our program unless you take some action on this subject. You're really not going to understand it very well after now. Even now we're struggling to understand some things. And you think that if we go further, it's going to be difficult to understand them because your corrupt faith is going to be saying, I can't accept this new thing I'm being taught. Can you see that? So when it comes to removing sin and its causes, I've got to have a faith that I can actually remove sin and its causes. And at the moment, our corrupt faith is saying, that's not even possible. So unless we make a shift in this area of our corruption of our faith and actually develop some pure faith, it's really pointless coming to the next lot of groups. Really pointless. We need to make some shifts on this issue if we're going to make change. Makes sense, eh? Yeah. So my suggestion to you is this. Examine your own life in the light of all the things you've been taught this week and examine it firstly from the position of what it tells you about your faith. What your actions and your motivations are based upon your faith. You don't need to really worry too much about your morals and values as much as you do need to worry about your faith. There's a nice Paget message that was done by King Solomon. So after I passed in the spirit world, I met King Solomon, and he was an interesting character while he was on earth. Eh? He was a very, very rich man, as you can imagine. He had over 1,000 women that he had sex with regularly. Wow. How much sin is there in that? He had 1,000 concubines. Had a whole, you could say it was a harem, right? How many soulmate relationships did he prevent from happening while he was on earth? Quite a lot, right? He had the capacity to engage a lot of sin because he had a lot of money. He was king, and because he was given a spirit came to him and gave him a lot of wisdom through decision making. So spirit guided the decision making he engaged. The Bible called that God's spirit settled upon him, But do you think it was God's Spirit? It couldn't have been because he sinned so much. Yeah. And he often made decisions based around sinning so much. So his wisdom was only given to him because the Spirit with him had some wisdom and could say and mention a whole heap of things that Solomon didn't personally know. But because of that, he became like a world-renowned figure at the time. And this was just over 1,000 years or so before my arrival on the earth. And, you know, as a result, he sinned a lot. But one of the things he said in one of his messages was this. He was asked by Paget, what was the most important thing in all of God's universe? Nice, simple question. He said, God's love on the part of God and faith on the part of the human. And he's right. Because faith is what motivates change. Truth can result in freedom, but you have to have faith in truth before you will change. You see? Without faith, no change is possible. Without a pure faith. A corrupt faith, of course, can cause change in the wrong direction and just bring more pain and suffering. And that's why we've got to look at my corrupt faith. Alright, well, what I'd like to do then is finish this discussion with you about faith. I think we've talked enough about it for you to understand it clearly and what's involved with faith. And what I've done is I've shortened this presentation by nearly, I think just over a half an hour, a bit more. So what that means is that we'll have a good opportunity in the Q&A to actually look at faith as our corrupt faith in practical examples and start to connect to the whole concept of how it works in real life. Right? And so now you have the opportunity to just ask a few questions about faith, put them in the question box at the back, and what we'll try to do is include them in the next hour and a bit of discussion with you so we can examine the practicalities of it, how it looks in your day-to-day life. Sound good?
Yeah.
So let's do that. Let's have a break now. Come back at 11:30 and we'll get started at 11:30.